What's up, guys? I am Jamie Bedingfield. You are listening to my podcast, Too Many Words, which I realize that you know this because you clicked on it, but still I am reaffirming you made it to the right place or have pointed out that this isn't lore or unqualified. Either way, welcome and thanks for tuning in. I am really excited to share this one, episode 58, which feels crazy that I've cobbled together 58 of these. But yeah, I have New York Times bestselling author of An Enchantment of Ravens, Margaret Rogerson, on the show today. And this is such a great talk. I think Margaret and I could have talked the weird and wondrous world of writing for hours. It was a true delight. I absolutely adore and Kindness of Ravens. The cover and the title pulled me in because of my weakness for all things Corvid. And I just loved every word of this story. If you enjoy YA fantasy, fae, magical forests, and darkness intertwined with beauty, or if someone that does, I would pick this up. And it's a great gift. The book is beautiful, and I will be anxiously awaiting Margaret's new fantasy standalone. So definitely check it out if you are not familiar with the book. And I will get to our talk super shortly. Need to do some rambling and take care of some business, but not for too long. I have a cold gaining power over me. But 2017 is nearing an end. And like many, I find myself reflecting on the year. It's been a long one on many fronts. And I can look ahead and see that 2018 is going to be an exciting one career-wise for me. Maybe I said this last year on the show, but I don't think so. If you know, though, definitely reach out. And things are moving. Hard work. It's, hard. And seeing peaks and glimmers that the hard work is paying off is encouraging and comforting and also unsettling. I seem to be balancing some kind of chaotic auto drive. Some serious things are getting done. My family and pets and home are getting on pretty good, and nothing is falling apart. And maybe I feel like that because I seem to be getting this anxiety flare up under control again, or maybe it's because I'm achieving a rhythm that works. I'm not sure, though it makes me nervous to point out that things are going well and all my projects are coming along. Do you guys ever feel like that when you speak out that, things are really good right now? Superstitious about optimism, I guess I'd call it. So, yes, it being the end of the year, I think I seriously sidetracked there for a moment, but all the reflecting, Too Many Words took a large piece of that reflection. In February, after making 50 episodes, I took a break to fully focus on a project, which, relatively speaking, I'm still working on that now, just a very different version of it. Heavy magic, broken hearts, and the beings that crave said magic. But, thanks to all you listeners who kept reaching out and then asking me when the show would return, it got me planning to bring it back. And I ended up realizing that this show doesn't take away from my fiction projects. It helps them. It helps me. And the podcast became part of my process without me realizing it. And, all the shares and downloads are building every day. And my inbox has been full of requests, and guests are almost completely booked until June. So things are growing, and that's really cool. And I wanted to say thank you. If, it can't be done without your support. And, if you wanted to help me in the show out further, you can go to patreon.com/too-many-words and pledge. Lots of fun goodies. And I have an audio mini-series in the works for after the holidays have settled. And it's really dark and strange, but I'm pretty excited to share it. And I have things I want to talk about, burning holes in my pockets, but I can't talk about them yet. So my pockets have to stick it out. And at that, I say, let's go to my talk with the wonderful Margaret Rogerson. Hey, Margaret, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My first ever podcast.
That's awesome. I am super excited. I finished reading An Enchantment of Ravens, and I looked you up, and I was just like, I got to have her on the show.
Thank you.
This An Enchantment of Ravens is your debut, correct?
Yes.
Wow. So that's a big moment.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. I've always wanted to be an author ever since I was a little kid. It's been my one dream in life. So it's been very exciting, very strange and surreal.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've third grade is when I decided to be an author. So yeah, I hear you. It's a long and interesting road.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's so different than you expect or sort of imagined and dreamed it would be like when you were a kid.
Well, there's this phenomenon that I hit that when I crossed over from writing for pleasure to writing in an attempt to make a living, there's days where it's just not fun and that it actually feels like work. And I never expected writing and storytelling to feel like work.
That's so true. I've struggled with the same feeling. I mean, I feel like almost every day it feels like work. At the same time, it's still very rewarding, but it's sort of not writing is not an option anymore. It's your job. So that does take a lot of the sort of the fun and the whimsy out of it. It's not that I think a lot of my relatives imagine that I'm sort of sitting there with a cup of tea, sort of whimsically writing away and having a great time. And it's a lot different than what people expect, really.
Oh, it so is. I mean, the whole writing gig. I mean, when I was a kid and, grown-ups would ask me what I wanted to do when I grew up, I wanted to respond to that answer as sarcastically as possible. So I would say, I want to spin around in circles and pick my nose. And I would just get these looks like, oh, I get the same looks now when people are like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm a writer. Oh,
Really?
yeah, it does seem, like this fanciful thing, and moments of it, can be, especially those scenes where you're just like, your fingers are on fire and you're just in it. Although right now I'm halfway through just a really intense rewrite, so my fingers aren't on fire. They're whiny.
Oh my God. Yeah. The halfway point is so rough too, because you have so much ahead of you.
Yes, it's the point of no return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
You've got all this behind you and you're heading forward, but I know the midpoint too. Always, I feel like there's like this extra pressure in my head when I'm like, oh, you're at the midpoint.
Mm-hmm.
This is, the hook to hang your story on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's the point where I tend to start really struggling if I'm having a hard time with the book. The halfway point is really killer.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, transitions in general for me, like any moment where it's like, okay, you're about to hit this big point, but you're working up to it. That's where I tend to flounder around and end up needing to delete a whole lot of descriptions because I've decided to just talk about, a table instead of what I actually talk about.
I feel you because I love description, as you probably noticed reading An Enchantment of Ravens. I will definitely go overboard with description. I can become pretty purple prosy when I don't watch myself. So I definitely relate to that.
Same here. Well, no, the prose in An Enchantment of Ravens is gorgeous, and you did an excellent job with all the, because it is very immersive and there is a lot of detail, but at no point does it slow down the story. It just moves with it, and it's really cool.
Thank you. That's a really really great compliment to receive, because that's one of the big things that I always worried about while writing it was, how much description is too much? How much can I sneak in here and not sort of bore the reader? So that's good to hear. Thank you.
Well, it's challenging. Actually, the project I'm working on right now, I have my characters are traveling, and Isabel and Rook, they're traveling. And that's tough because you enter these new places and you want to introduce them properly, but you also, need to just keep the story moving. It's a difficult balance.
Hmm. Yeah. I think I was at a huge advantage with my book because it takes place largely just in a forest. And that kind of already does a lot of the work for you because everyone knows what a forest looks like. So
Mhm.
there are a lot of things that I really didn't need to describe because I knew the reader could just sort of imagine it. Um, I think it's harder when you're dealing with maybe different kinds of landscapes that not everyone is familiar with, or towns or cities, because then you need to do a lot more groundwork to kind of establish geography, terrain, layout of buildings, and so forth. But with a forest, it's just it's trees everywhere, so you don't really you're sort of at an automatic advantage in that respect.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I just love the forests in your story. It's so fun, and you can just see like you said, you see the forest, but it has all this magical elements to it. So cool.
Oh, thank you. I'm a big nature person. I love spending time in nature. I used to go in the woods and write. So yeah, I had a really, really fun time spending a lot of the story in a forest, a magical forest. It's where I would like to live personally.
Yeah, no, I read that in your bio that you hope to one day live near a forest that gets darker at night. And I feel you. Where I live is so packed, and it's only getting more packed, and the city's just pouring into us and taking down old houses and putting like 5 houses in its place.
Oh gosh,
Yeah,
that's sad to watch.
it is. It is. And well, which is even sadder is there's just the patches of trees are turning into McMansions.
Oh,
And I'm finding myself like, I keep going on real estate sites, like looking up cabins. Like,
I do the same thing.
oh, it looks like a ski retreat and it's in the middle of nowhere. Imagine riding on that deck.
Oh yeah.
Well, one thing that I really, really like about Enchantment of Ravens is Isabel. She is strong and talented. And even though, she crossed paths with this super attractive, fair folk, she remains strong and to her morals and her loyalty to her family. And I love that she has such a backbone.
Well, thank you. I was directly inspired to write that type of heroine, actually by Robin McKinley. I'm a huge Robin McKinley fan. And when I was coming up with the idea for this book, I specifically thought to myself, I would really like to write a heroine who sort of reminds me of Robin McKinley heroine. One thing that I really like about Robin McKinley's heroines is that some of them are fighters, like Hero in the Crown. I loved that book when I was a kid.
Oh, like,
Um, yeah, the main character in that book, she battles dragons. She's good with a sword, but a lot of the time, Robin McKinley's heroines, they aren't really fighters, but they're strong in other ways, and they oftentimes have some sort of a skill or some kind of work that they do with their hands, like they're gardeners or they're bakers, and that skill sort of ends up informing the plot of the story, or it's really important to their character. It sort of grounds their character in a really important way. So that's kind of what gave me the idea to write Isabel as the type of person, not only the type of person that she is, but also that she has this craft that's really central to who she is as a person, central to her identity, and also the plot of the book.
oh, I love that, and I related a lot to it because I feel like I'm 50% writer, 50% rest of the human. um, so being so like caught up in your craft, and I just well, and the fact that the reaction to something that she made that she was proud of spurred the adventure is so cool because like when you're creating something, there is that fear of how will it be received.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I imagined that was just you were able probably to put some of your writing angst in there.
Oh, for sure. I also myself have a background as a portrait artist. So
Do you?
so yeah, that's another. I mean, that's the reason why specifically I decided to make Isabel a portrait artist. Of all the different kinds of crafts that I could have given her, I decided to go with portrait art because I felt like it was something I could write authentically and from the heart. And also, because I'm really lazy, I also thought, well, I won't have to research this. I already know enough about it that I won't have to do any research, which was a bonus. So that was kind of a twofold decision there. Yeah.
Really cool. Yeah, I was wondering about that. Yeah, if I didn't know that you had a background, but I did think, oh, she must have put a lot of research into this because this is, seems very accurate to, what a portrait artist would have to do. And I love the natural ingredients that you work into the paint supplies.
Oh yeah, that is something that I certainly I did have to research that part. And a lot of the sort of because painting was different back then. You didn't have plastic tubes of oil paint, so I did have to research some of that. And one thing that found its way into the book that I thought was really interesting is that prior to the invention of rubber erasers, artists used actually bread to erase charcoal. So that was one thing I came across that was interesting.
That's so cool. Don't you love to find those gems when you're exploring different, things for your work and you're like, oh, wow, that's a little nugget that I'm never going to forget.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you come across the weirdest stuff. Like I remember for one story that I ended up not writing, I was really researching the history of forks, and it was fascinating. It was way more interesting than I expected it to be. I was basically just trying to figure out, when people really started using forks. And I went down this rabbit hole of researching forks, and it was fascinating and strange.
That's really cool. So when did we start using forks?
Honestly, I can't really remember super well, but I know in European society, or at least in England, forks were considered to be very sort of excessively dainty kind of utensil to use. They only used really knives and spoons to eat with. So, people got criticized for using forks as sort of like dainties, and and it didn't catch on until later than I expected, which was interesting.
I guess that, like, the Renaissance festivals and stuff, you have those like turkey legs.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, why would you use a fork if you could just pick up a leg?
Yeah, right, right. That was kind of what seemed to be the prevailing opinion, was like, oh, it's for being kind of nitpicky and overly I don't know exactly. I think maybe the French were doing it, so the English were like, oh, the French or something like that.
I love it.
Yeah.
No, the research wormhole though, it's such a thing. I actually had to start setting a timer for myself because I was doing all this research on different mythologies, just across several cultures, and I was just sucking up entire days. And I was just like, okay, you don't need to read that much about this. Like, just bookmark it and come back. You have work to do.
Oh yeah, gosh, you can really really spend so much time at it. And one thing that I tend to have a problem with, I don't know if you've experienced this, is that the more research you do, the more you feel yourself trying to include in the story, possibly to the detriment of the story,
Mm-hmm.
just because you know all this stuff and it's so fascinating and you want to put as much of it as you can into the story. But I tend to find myself going overboard and putting too much into the story.
This rewrite that I'm working on, I'm noticing a lot of that where I'm like, okay, all of this just needs to go. As awesome as these details are, it doesn't aid the story.
Yeah.
Although sometimes when I have all those extra like notes and, different things that aren't going to go in the story, I can't help but think of like Tolkien's display in some museums where people are like, looking over his, yellowed paper of like a messy outline. So
Yeah, one day we'll have all this material, all of this stuff that we've accumulated.
oh yeah, no, all like, I mean, I have, my family's going to have to deal with just so many books and notebooks after I'm gone. Although I get that's kind of dark, but sometimes I think about that. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's natural as a writer too, because we have a job that's, I mean, in so many ways defined by the fact that it remains alive after we ourselves are dead. So I think it is. I suppose it is somewhat morbid, though. As writers, I think our idea of morbid is a little bit different than that of most people. But no, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like we're here and we're accumulating these things and based on, what we need or what we're interested in, and then those things remain.
Hmm.
I agree with you as far as writers. Connection with the darker thoughts. There's well, it's like you have to get your mind certain places, and it's ingrained and practiced in us to think of all these different outcomes for different things that happen. So there's going to be some weird ones that pop up in there.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, when you're in a group of writers, I was at Anderson's young adult conference recently, in November in Chicago, and I was on the bus with a bunch of other authors. I was talking to another author, Megan Atwood, and we were talking about, I think, a story about someone getting her finger cut off or something like that, and then it, we realized that the two seats behind us, they were the two authors behind us were talking about serial killers. And then the ones across from us were talking about some equally really morbid topic that I can't remember at the moment. And we just burst out laughing because we were like, you're in a group of authors when everyone's talking about murder or dismemberment.
Totally, I love that. Yeah, no, I was working on a short that was kind of it was a take on blood doping. And
Oh,
I don't know if you're familiar with what blood doping is, but
it's just by the name, I can kind of form an impression, but what is it exactly?
well, there's it's basically so common with athletes. They get blood, other people's blood, like so they basically pump themselves with too much blood to increase performance.
Oh,
And there was this I like was just combing through the internet and reading various news, and this article came up, and it was about this warehouse in Russia that was found, and it was a blood doping plant, and there was all these people there like getting blood taken from them to give to these athletes. And I just got like obsessed with the idea of this, and I was like, how can I turn this into magic?
oh my God, that is absolutely fascinating, and that is, yeah, your mind instantly goes in so many different directions when you yeah, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
No, and then it's totally ruined my small talk for like weeks because I'm doing all this blood doping. I'm like, I go pick my kids up from school and they're like, how's it going? And I was just like, blood doping this, blood doping
Oh, that's so funny.
that. The weather.
Oh.
Well, is there like a favorite scene or aspect of Enchantment of Ravens that really stuck out to you as, one of your favorite moments or even like really difficult?
Oh gosh, I have several different potential answers to that.
Nice.
In terms of just favorite scene, I think it's a kind of a silly one. It's the teapot scene where a teapot falls on Rook's head. The ensuing reaction and conversation around that. That's my favorite scene in the book.
That must have been fun to write. It was really fun to read.
Oh, good. Yeah, I still remember where I was when I wrote it. I was actually sitting in the park in like October with the fall colors around me, and that scene wasn't planned. I was just having a really hard time around the middle of the story. I started having a really hard time at that point. So I was just kind of writing these like little fun scenes to try to sort of get myself back into the rhythm of writing this story. And so the teapot scene, certainly that was a lot of fun to write, and I love that scene. And any scene really with Gadfly, I love his character a lot, so I loved writing his scenes as well.
Yeah, that comes your love for him definitely comes through because he is just he really does shine, and there is a certain there he's very endearing. And in general, you really do a great job with Gadfly and Rook here is that you balance the likable, but also, the I'm not so sure about this guy.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough. It's tough to balance that.
Oh, I'm glad that came across. I really enjoyed writing about the fair folk in general. I've always been really into folklore. Um, so, and one of the things that I love about them is that sort of deceptive, what is true and what is not. Obviously, they cannot lie, but they can be very deceptive. So, particularly with Gadfly's character, I really enjoyed exploring that aspect of their nature.
There's some of those qualities too that you're talking about with, the fair folk, where I definitely, some of them, and I believe some of these were gadfly scenes, where Midsummer's Night's Dream by Shakespeare popped in my head, because there's like that similar, like, um, dark, there's this layer of darkness kind of underneath this, like, more forward whimsical element, and that's just awesome.
Oh, great. I'm glad you think so. I think the scene with the masquerade ball, I specifically went into that scene thinking, okay, I need to make this really Midsummer Night's Dream-esque, where there's this superficial, just extreme extravagance, lavishness, and beauty, but there's something off about it, like how they're all dancing without music because they have no craft, so they can't play music. So it's like this silent waltz. And then, of course, there's kind of this level of decay and wrongness underneath all the glamour. So I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah, well, that came through in spades. That was an awesome scene, and there was definitely, like, it was very glamorous, but there was also, like, it was also kind of scary, because you felt the looming, like, oh no, what's gonna happen?
Good. I love being scary. It's one of my favorite things as an author, scaring people.
Well, yeah, I mean, in general, when you're going for emotions, at least, with me, but I'm pretty sure this is, kind of the thing, is like, if you want your reader to feel scared or sad, you have to, get in that spot yourself, and, scare yourself a little bit, and that can be fun.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Do you use music at all to get into moods?
I do listen to music a lot while I'm writing. I've noticed sometimes I'm more productive with silence, but I still really like to listen to music.
Yeah, I also I rely on music a lot for mood, and sometimes when I'm thinking, like, oh well, I'm having trouble focusing, I switch to instrumental. But I don't. It's funny. I like the quiet, but I don't like silence.
Yeah, I feel like I'm similarly. I'll listen to music for a particular mood. So while I may be more productive in silence, I may not be able to pick up exactly that mood that I'm looking for. And music will help with that.
Yes, totally. It's funny though, because I was actually, a couple weeks ago, I was working on this really just, heartfelt, sad scene, and I kind of just woke up in a good mood. I almost had to, like, get myself into this, like, morose place to write it, and I was just like, all right.
Oh man, yeah, yeah. That's
I don't know if you have to, if you find that at all, that you need to, like, get yourself in a darker spot. I don't know. The book I'm working on right now is very dark. So,
Yeah, yeah. I do sort of know the feeling. Sometimes I really, I guess because writers are often somewhat terrible, I really enjoy inflicting pain and sorrow on my characters. I have sort of this gleeful joy around doing so. Partially because I write happy endings. I always write happy endings, so I know they'll be okay, no matter what they're going through. But yeah, I do have to often listen to music or just kind of put myself in the right mindset to tackle those scenes sometimes.
it's fun though. It's fun to be able to wield all that, I think.
It is fun, yeah. You have this almost the just sense of like I don't want to sound like like I'm unhinged, but I have spoken to other authors about this, so I know it's a real thing. It's not just me, but you have almost this sense of just like pure creation when a scene is going right. You have this almost like I hesitate to say godlike. I feel like that sounds unhinged, but you really have this sense. I mean, the way that I wrote Isabel when she's creating her paintings is basically the way that I feel when I'm writing a scene, and it's really pouring forth in this way.
Totally. It's very euphoric.
Yeah, yeah, euphoric. Okay, that's a much better way of putting it.
I don't know. I like godlike.
Godlike power.
I created you, and now you must perish. No.
Yeah, right. Well, you've created this whole world. You've created these characters. I mean, it's a really interesting sensation.
It is. No, and I crave it, especially when I'm in parts, in a phase where I'm not like, I don't have a lot of output going on, or if I'm in between things. But yeah, those moments when you're just moving the words, or even better when you're writing and something pops up and you're like, and it's perfect and you're like, oh, that's awesome. Like the unplanned perfect moment. I love that.
Oh, me too. That's the best part of writing.
Yeah, the surprise moment. Love it. Or
Mhm.
or when a character takes more of the reign, like you're like, you think the character is, more secondary and they come up and you're like, whoa, hello.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what happened with, Gadfly's character. Um, yeah, and I think it's interesting, the best characters often arise out of that when they sort of you introduce them as just minor characters and they really surprise you, and oftentimes I find that those to be the really interesting characters, the ones that end up being my favorite a lot of the time.
Oh no, I totally agree with you there. Yeah, and I think it plays into the whole, because you know you, you in the organic character story, is always the goal there. So when you have this, I almost wonder if it's because those characters enter the show with less pressure, so they're able to kind of, you know, grow on the side while, I'm focusing on like the protagonist or who I think the protagonist is, and somebody else comes up.
That's a really good point. I think, yeah, that sounds right to me. I find that a lot of stuff that happens, good stuff that happens for me in writing, in any aspect of writing, is sort of um, it comes out of that sense of not having any pressure,
Hmm.
if that makes any sense. Like for me, I find it very hard to write under deadline, for example. But as soon as that deadline is gone, my mind just starts spinning with ideas, um, because the stress is gone, the pressure is gone. So maybe characters are kind of the same way. The less pressure you put on a character, the more they just sort of grow organically.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, the mind in general is just because there's all these like pockets and corners where things hang out. And it's like, yeah, when like some of the best thoughts and ideas come, they happen in the background.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's so hard, like especially when, you're feeling blocked or something. It's so hard to make yourself remove yourself from the computer, from the notepad, and, allow your mind to work. Because like you're writing happens sometimes when you're not writing. So it's important to let yourself have that time to think. But at least for me, it's hard if I'm like, driven and I want to, finish this thing or do that thing. It's hard for me to walk away and let myself, you know, let my mind do what it needs to do.
I'm exactly the same way. Yeah, I'll tend to overwork myself and burn myself out. I have a hard time accepting the idea that taking time off can actually allow me to work more efficiently, because when I'm, under deadline or I'm stressed out, I have a tendency to think I need to devote every single waking hour that I can to working. And even knowing that it's detrimental to my mental health, I still do it. Um, because it's hard to relax, when you're in that kind of state of mind. It's really hard to let go and walk away.
It totally is. Well, and I think part of it is that because it's such a long process that, there's some days where it's hard to feel like you've been productive or that, you've accomplished anything because you've just done this small part to this bigger thing. So stepping away seems like the worst thing in the world. I agree with you. I never want to do it. But then I do it and I'm like, oh, well, now I know what to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, back to what we were talking about with characters, how like maybe the ones with less pressure are allowed to stand out more. You've got this, your these different parts of your mind that like you have to you have to get past the the bossy, insecure, fear-ridden part and like let the other part come. But in order, it's like it's a dance between balancing and managing, but also allowing things to just happen. It's very strange.
Yeah, it is. It is. I guess, when you combine work with passion, you always get maybe some level of Also, the fact that writing is such a self-directed thing, so self-motivated and requires so much self-discipline, I think it can be really hard to strike a balance.
Oh yeah, it definitely is. I am not the best at work-life balance. I tend to always just find a way to slip into my office, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm tell my family that I'm just going to switch the laundry," and then an hour later, they're like, "Hey, where were you?" It's like, "Oh, I'm got sucked in." So I saw on your events page that you were at the holiday fairy party.
Oh yeah, at Hicklebee's in San Jose. That's actually where I got this cold. Not at Hicklebee's specifically, not to cast blame upon the great people at Hicklebee's, but just from traveling, I got this nasty death cold. I had so much fun at Hicklebee's. It was fantastic. I met fellow author Parker Peavy House.
Oh,
I was really excited to meet her. Yeah. And Hicklebee's is a great store. It's so cool. They have signatures from a bunch of different authors all over their walls. They have actually a sorting hat drawn by J.K. Rowling.
really?
Yeah, I took a picture of it, and I like also touched it because I was kind of like, maybe if I touch it, I'll get a little bit of something out of this, like magical writing power. Apparently, a lot of authors actually do that, which does not surprise me in the least.
I would
Um,
totally touch it.
yeah, yeah. So I had so much fun at Hicklebee's. It was a fantastic event, and a lot of people came dressed as fairies with really fantastic costumes. One of them actually came dressed as Rook.
That's awesome.
I know, I know. It's one of those weird things that you never imagine is going to happen to you, that someone is actually going to dress up as one of your characters. So it was just I was like so excited that I think my brain just kind of shut down. It was
Oh, that's a
very,
big moment.
yeah, it was, I mean, it was, yeah, it's like the first time you get fan art, the first time anything like that happens, it is just, it's overwhelming, honestly.
There's almost though something, I'm going to take it probably to a strange place again, but almost something like bittersweet about accomplishing dreams. I don't know if that makes sense, but like there's, reaching a goal that you work so hard to, or, having, it's like it's amazing, but it's also like, I don't know, not that it's sad. I don't know if I'm making sense.
No, you're totally making sense. I feel the same way, I mean, practically every day.
Awesome.
It Yeah, it's weird because writing is such a private pursuit, and it you put so much of yourself into it that having it published, having it out there, having people love it and having people hate it, it's a really strange experience because it's almost like just publicly exposing a lot of your vulnerability. And so much of it is more wonderful than you ever could have anticipated, and some of it is, there are lows that are lower than you ever expected. So it is a really complicated experience. I think bittersweet is definitely a good way of describing it.
Awesome. Yeah. No, there's it's yeah, it's just like you said, it's very vulnerable, but it's also like, as you're doing it's such a long and detailed process, and you spend so much time with these characters, creating them and also getting them to a point where others can actually, receive who they are and what they want. That is like, in a way, you're making these relationships, and then you're done. And there's just, it's like, you put something in, you put so much into it, and like some of it stays there.
Yeah, that does make sense. I still think about the characters from An Enchantment of Ravens all the time, even though it's a standalone. I'm probably never going to write a book in that universe again. But yeah, they stay with you. I mean, they become a part of you, really, in a weird way. It's interesting.
There's this book that I read a couple months ago, Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard. I don't know if you've it's amazing. I highly recommend it. And the magicians in it, there's this aspect of when the magicians use their magic, it costs something. It costs a piece of yourself, or a piece of somebody else. And I when I read that, I just totally applied that to, writing, because it's like the lines there just seem so similar.
Oh yeah, wow. I've actually really been wanting to read that book. That makes me want to read it more. So
Oh my
thank you.
gosh, it's amazing. And if I can judge, what you like based on the book you wrote, I would say that you will really like this.
It sounds really right up my alley. I love the idea of magic as involving some component of sacrifice. I feel like I can't really write magic without that element. Like in enchantment, the fair folk have to actually shed blood in order to perform magic. And then in the book that I'm writing now, there's also a really great cost to performing magic. So I love that element. I really love it. And I guess maybe it's just something that I relate to because, as you said, it does feel a lot like writing a book.
Well, also, too, I mean, when you're dealing with magic as the writer, you have to, make sure that weakness is still present. Otherwise, the power won't be as powerful. You need those weaknesses. So when you really zero in on the cost of having these magical abilities, it is really neat. And as far as like a wormhole, like with research, you can just really just pull some cool things out of it.
Yeah, it's so true. I'm really excited about the story that you might write with the blood thing.
Oh yeah, no, I have I'm drafting it now and it's pretty fun. I mean, it's dark and strange and sad, but it's it's fun.
Yeah, no, it's such a fascinating idea. I really want to read that book. So excited about that.
And so I was going to ask, so you're working on another novel?
Yeah, I signed a 2-book deal with Simon and Schuster, so it's another young adult fantasy standalone. So it's completely unrelated to enchantment. I'm drafting it right now. I had a lot of the sort of classic sophomore novel difficulties. It's really strange writing a second book under deadline when it's completely unrelated to the first book and you didn't start out with any idea of what you wanted to write next. So I had to kind of come up with a completely new idea from scratch. So fantasy world, come up with the world building and the magic and the new characters. And I definitely hit a lot of roadblocks with that. The first couple of ideas that I came up with, they just weren't really working out. They were really flawed. So finally I've settled on something that I'm really in love with. I think it's turning out better than enchantment. It's been a really long road to get here though. With a lot of discarded failed manuscripts littering the way.
Oh, I hear you. It can be hard, especially, I mean, under deadline too. That's something new and that's a different kind of pressure. But as far as like, the balancing and building the characters with, fantasy, the world building, it's awesome, but it's a very delicate thing where it's like, if you're not careful, you can just, at least for me, this rewrite I'm working on is the third complete rewrite for this concept. And I'm on the right page now, but I was just struggling so much and I was fighting myself in a way that wasn't helpful because part of me knew like, hey, Jamie, this isn't right. You're not, feeling it.
Yeah.
But
I know exactly that feeling. Yeah.
But yeah, like uncovering that story that like, that's in you that you can tell, but it's like, I don't know. As I'm saying this, I'm like picturing like uncovering dinosaur bones. I know nothing about that, but it's like, you just piece by piece and it's a weird sensation to know that there's this story, but you don't know what it is yet.
Yeah. I'm a heavy outliner, but I still experience that. Like the book I'm working on now, I'm actually working on, like you, I'm kind of rewriting it. I'm on the second version of it now. I got about halfway in, so to the dreaded halfway mark, and before I realized that a lot of what I had just wasn't working. There was just something that was really fundamentally flawed about the story. So I went back to the drawing board and I actually just cropped out a bunch of the world building because I realized that I had included this whole component to the world building that was basically hobbling the story and overcomplicating it.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I just discovering, what the real story is, kind of discovering the world building is it really is a process and it can be really hard even for someone like me who's a really hardcore outliner and planner.
No, I'm also an outliner and this one project has just kept messing with me and what what I ended up finding, I had spent my summer just writing like 30,000 words that were really hard to write and unusable. And I put it in the drawer, and I just was focusing on short stories for a bit. And it came to me to try writing it in the third person because it's in the first. And I did that, and everything just started clicking.
Oh my gosh. Okay. It's so funny you say that because I did exactly the same thing. I switched from first person to second in this rewrite, and it completely unlocked the story for me.
No
Like,
way.
yeah, totally. And I have a friend who also is doing the same thing. She wrote her first draft in third person and switched to first, and she had the same experience. And it's so interesting how obviously my first book is written in first person, so I kind of just thought, okay, well, I'm good at writing in first person. I'm just going to continue doing that. But some stories, they just intrinsically call for a particular person or tense.
Mhm.
It's so strange. And it's like it's almost as if you as the author are not really in control of that. It's the story that demands it, not you.
Totally.
It's really weird. It's a weird phenomenon.
It is weird how, yeah, just the narrative switch, and then suddenly you're able to see all these things that you couldn't before. It's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
it's some cool stuff though.
that is really cool.
That's cool. That's cool to hear that you did the switch too.
Yeah, and it's so funny that my friend did the same thing, although opposite. She switched to first, and then you're doing it. So yeah, it is interesting. It's kind of it's sort of a universal thing. It's weird, and it almost makes writing feel like it's something that's alive, that we're not really in control of, but there are sort of these universal truths to writing that come through with so many different authors. It's weird. It's interesting.
It's so true. It's like the craft itself, like, we're able to, tap into it. But there is this like other component that's like outside of our control that we can make them tea and like let them in the house. But it's really like ultimately like, yeah, there is an aspect that's out of control.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, Margaret, can you tell everybody where they can find you and your works?
Oh yeah. Well, my website is margaretrogerson.com. I have a Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, although I will be taking a social media break for deadline reasons. But I have a contact email on my website. My book, An Enchantment of Ravens, is for sale, I think, pretty much everywhere books are sold. That's all I can think of. You can also find me wandering around in the woods sometimes looking for mushrooms,
That's awesome.
sniffing for truffles.
Are you able to pick fungi? Like, do you have?
No, unfortunately, I would die. My favorite fungi tend to be the poisonous ones. I really like fungi. I think it's just really cool. I actually in college, my housemate found truffles in our backyard at on campus, which was really strange. And he like cooked them and ate them, and we were like really sort of like, oh, because there's another mushroom that looks a great deal like a truffle, but it's deadly. So we were sort of like, oh my God. And he's like, I researched this. I'm sure it's a truffle. And we were like, okay, but you eat the first ones, and then we're going to wait like 12 hours before we eat them. But they were truffles, which is weird. We had a huge quantity of truffles just growing in our backyard.
That's awesome.
Yeah, strange.
Well, here in Washington, it's like wild mushroom country. There's like all sorts of stuff
Oh,
that grows, and we have stuff that grows in our backyard. And there's these clubs, local clubs that like get together, and they get they learn about all the different kinds, and then they go onto these like hiking expeditions and pick mushrooms. That's why I asked if you were in a club, because I've been picking
oh,
those up.
that is
I want
that is
that.
yeah, that is my dream. If we had clubs like that around here, I actually should look and see because that sounds like so much fun. Do you get like mushroom circles, the big fairy rings of
Yeah.
mushrooms?
Yeah. No, we get really just really varied and cool things. I can't think of the name of them, but I get these in my backyard. They're like almost like miniature forests of really skinny stemmed, small white capped mushrooms. You could just picture like little ferry just like walking through there like it's, the middle of town.
Oh, that's really neat.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Fungi are pretty cool.
Oh, I'm so jealous. Well, one day I might move to Washington just for the fungus views.
Yeah, well, it's so moist here. I think that's why, it's moist. So we just, if you're not careful, moss will grow on you. So,
oh, I would love that. So I should come on over.
yeah, no, it's pretty magical here in some spots. I mean, we've got the only rainforest in the United States over on the Olympic Peninsula. There's just the moss that's growing on those trees is like the brightest shade of yellow I've ever seen.
Oh, wow. Oh, that sounds so cool.
Yeah.
That's my ideal place, not a beach, it's a mossy forest with lots of mushrooms.
Well, and actually, so we have it's interesting because we live, where I live, very close to the water. So we have the mossy woods, but then we have rocky beaches. It is, if you haven't been, I definitely recommend it. It's quite the inspiring places.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. Yeah, I love that kind of shoreline. It's so dramatic and moody.
Definitely, yeah. You have a cup of tea and a notebook, and you can just, go with the clouds.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Margaret, thank you so much for coming on. It was a blast talking to you.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a really cool experience. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, and it was really great talking to you.
That's awesome.
Good luck with your revision because I am in the same boat, so I understand how tough that is.
Thank you, and you too. Yes.
Thanks. I need it.
The rewrite power team.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Margaret.
Oh, thank you.
And that wraps it up. A huge thanks again to Margaret for coming on the show, and a thanks to you for lending the ear. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at @meBettingfield and the show at Too Many Words Pod, and find me on Instagram at Jamie the Scribbler. Head to the site, tmwpod.com and patreon.com/too many words. And I will talk to you next week. I close out the year with author Mike Cole, which will be quite the good time. Over and out.